When I was but a wee small transport-themed influencer, my dad would often take us to the nearby Kew Bridge Steam Museum. It's been a long time since I last visited. Actually, in the intervening time, it's been renamed the London Museum of Water and Steam, and I'd been thinking I'd like to pay it another visit. So it was very serendipitous that I received an email from them asking if I'd like to have a look around. I certainly did. The museum is in Brentford, not far from Kew Bridge railway station and Kew Bridge itself. It's also just a short walk from the musical museum if you want to make a day of it. The museum is housed in what was part of the Kew Bridge Waterworks, which opened in 1838 under the Grand Junction Waterworks Company, and finally closed in 1986. One way or another, it's made quite a few appearances in pop culture. Charles Dickens paid it a visit to see what was going on with the water scene. It pops up in the background of A Hard Day's Night. It was the Doctor's earthbound hideout in remembrance of the Daleks. And it even made a sort of appearance in Thomas the Tank Engine, in model form as the Great Waterton Waterworks. The massive standpipe tower is undoubtedly its iconic feature, and I'll explain a little about that in a bit. The Industrial Revolution brought massive expansion to London, and that brought new challenges. One of these was the question of water. How could you possibly supply all the people and animals of the city with clean water, let alone all the new industries that were popping up? The water companies often couldn't keep up with demand, relying on systems of supply that hadn't changed much since the Romans. The solution to the problem of water was steam. The first experimental steam pumping engine was tried unsuccessfully around 1713 by the York Buildings Company. It was of a type invented by Thomas Newcomen. It would take about a century for a type of engine to arrive that was really up to the job. First, James Watt devised a more efficient kind of cylinder that meant the engine wasted less energy. Then his arch-rival Richard Trevithick came up with a higher pressure engine, which could generate more power. And thus we got the Cornish engine. The Cornish engines were big and expensive, but there was no better machine for pumping the huge quantities of water over the distances required. Soon they were being installed all over London. Kew Bridge was one of the works set up to meet the demand, drawing water from the cleaner Thames upstream of central London. There are several Cornish engines on site, including the massive 90 and 100-inch cylinder engines that are large enough to walk through. This is the only complete working example of one of Edward Bull's engines. It was installed here in 1856. There's also a Boulton and Watt engine, and yes, that's the same Watt I mentioned earlier. Actually, the Boulton and Watt engine is older than the building it's in, having been built in 1820 to work at Chelsea, and managing a remarkable 123-year working life. Here, in what was once the boiler room, are preserved a number of engines from other sites. This little James K engine was built in 1867 for the Rothschild estate at Dancer's End. Small engines like this were commonly installed in factories and mills. You don't need a lot of water for one estate. I think this 1863 Eaton and Amos engine is very elegant. Like the Dancer's End engine, it's a rotative engine, i.e. the beam drives a flywheel. This makes for smoother, more balanced power output, but the compromise is that it's heavier and more complicated. They were favoured where there was less demand for water and you didn't need the enormous power of a Cornish engine. And that sounds like a good cue to talk about the standpipe tower. Apart from acting as a neat symbol of the museum, this served an important purpose for the Cornish engines. A rotative engine has a smooth power output, but a Cornish engine does not. It pushes water as the beam falls. This creates surges which put a lot of pressure on the mains, which, of course, you really don't want. The tower is filled with pipes. The engines pump water up the tower through the pipes, reducing the surge, and resulting in a more even pressure when it goes back down into the mains. This is a very simplified explanation. I'm not an engineer, and I barely even drink water. Being out here, it's a good time to talk about this water wheel. I love a water wheel. Before steam, water wheels were a mechanical means of pumping water. They were, it has to be said, pretty limited in their abilities. but I like them. Back inside, let's look at this Hawthorne Davy triple expansion engine. This is a real spring chicken, dating from 1910. Now this is complicated, but your basic steam engine works on the principle of having a cylinder where the steam pushes the piston and drives the thing. In a triple expansion engine, the steam from that cylinder is exhausted into a second, lower pressure cylinder, which also drives the thing, and then a third, even lower pressure cylinder, which also drives the thing. It means you get the most out of your steam. Once again, disclaimer, I barely know what I'm talking about here. Engines like this were very popular on ships. If you'd like to see some larger examples, head over to the not-too-distant Kempton Steam Museum. This triple expansion engine worked at Newmarket. And finally, this lad here was the last steam pumping engine at work in London. It was built in 1910 by James Simpson and Company. It was originally installed at Whaddon Pumping Station in Croydon, and was operating until 1983, which feels like a total anachronism to me. I mean, when you had punk rock and Margaret Thatcher, this thing was still working. Steam would be replaced by diesel and electric pumps, and the museum has examples of both. Although to me, an electric pump just isn't as interesting as a steam engine. I like something with lots of moving parts. Now you might be wondering, if this is the boiler room, where are the boilers? Well, the museum has one gas-powered boiler that powers everything. When the engines don't need to actually pump water, they need a lot less steam. The coal to power the boilers was brought by river, and brought up to the works by an underground railway. That is no longer accessible, but there is still a railway on site, this narrow-gauge line. It's not original, but railways like this were common around larger waterworks. There was one between Hampton and Kempton, for example. The team were kind enough to let me poke around their engine shed. The motive power consists of 2 locomotives. Thomas Wicksteed, a real-life Thomas the Tank Engine, is actually a modern replica of a Kerr Stuart Wren class. I love the Wrens. They're a delightful lightweight industrial engine that was supplied to lines all over the world. Thomas Wicksteed, the man not the locomotive, was the chap who first spotted that these Cornish engines might be useful for supplying water. So no Wicksteed, no Kew Bridge Waterworks, no London Museum of Water and Steam. The other engine is a 3-cylinder Lister diesel engine named Alistair, and I'm ashamed to say that I only just got the joke there. Despite being far more modern than Thomas, it's a lot older, dating from 1957. There was also this engine at the back of the shed. I'm not so hot on industrial diesels, so if you have any idea what it is, let me know in the comments. You can ride this railway on some weekends, although as you might have gathered, it wasn't in operation the day I visited. And for the last port of call today, they let me see something that's not open to the public. This workshop. It used to be the case that industrial premises tried to do as much as they could on site. Kew Bridge had its own blacksmith and carpenter, as well as all the engineers needed to keep the engines going. And it had its own workshop, with this fiendishly complicated belt drive system. The works was bombed during the First World War, and you can actually still see one of the scars of this in the corner here. The ultimate hope is to open this to the public, but currently it's under restoration as a sort of side project. So as you can see, the museum is very well worth a visit. Now it's fair to say that I have a lot of nostalgia for this place, so I am a little bit biased. But if you're interested in the history of water supply, in the history of steam engines, or you just like to see big cool machines at work, you should definitely check it out. Well, I do hope you enjoyed today's video. If you did, please do leave a like and consider subscribing for more. I would like as ever to thank my donors on Ko-fi, on Patreon, and here on YouTube for your generous support. You are the high-pressure boiler to my Cornish engine. I would also like to thank the staff of the London Museum of Water and Steam for showing me around and letting me film in their delightful museum. I'll put a link to their website down below. Do check it out, there's always lots going on there. I'm also thinking this footage of steam engines is kind of mesmerizing. I've made a second video that's just the engines working. I guess it's ASMR or something? I don't really know what ASMR is, if I'm honest. Anyway, that's linked down below as well. And I'll see you all again very soon. Cheerio.